Welcome to Joy Unfiltered. I'm Rachel, and this is a podcast about joy. Not the shiny, performative kind, not the everything happens for a reason kind. This is joy as a strategy, a way to stay steady when life feels loud, a way to stay human when things are hard, a way to lead, love, and live without burning out or checking out. Some episodes will be just me. Some will be honest conversations with people who have lived their way into a deeper, truer joy. No fixing, no bypassing, just real stories, real tools, and room to breathe. Let's get into it. Welcome to another episode of Joy Unfiltered. I am Rachel, your host, and you are in for a treat today. I have Chase Thayer here with me, and we are going to talk all things recovery, family dynamics, how healing or perhaps lack thereof within families kind of impacts everyone. Before I send it over to Chase, though, let me just read his impressive bio here. So Chase is a long-term recovery coach and family systems specialist with nearly 20 years of experience working with addiction, mental health, and complex family dynamics. Drawing from both professional experience and his own recovery journey, which we'll hear a little bit about today, Chase works not only with individuals, but with entire families. So he helps parents, siblings, and loved ones understand their role in healing, boundaries, and sustainable change. His approach bridges compassion with accountability, focusing on, as I said before, long-term recovery, family repair, and breaking generational cycles. So welcome, Chase, to Joy Unfiltered.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome. So we were just talking a little bit before the podcast. We have a little bit in common. I am actually in St. Paul, Minnesota right now. You are in Austin, Texas, but I just spent 2 years or 2.5 years in Austin, Texas before I moved back to the tundra. And you've spent lots of time in St. Paul.
Yes. Yep. I love it. It's crazy how that happens. So we've probably been in the same coffee shop. Who knows?
We probably have been in the same coffee shop at some point in our lives, but let's give the listeners a little bit more insight into who you are. So I always like to, this sounds so trite, but start at the very beginning. So if you want to share a little bit with us kind of how you came to what you're doing now. So perhaps that starts a little bit with your origin story.
Yeah, awesome. So, my name is Chase Thayer. I was born and raised in Provo, Utah. I'm the oldest of 5 kids. And yes, if you're wondering, religious-wise in background, it was a Mormon LDS family. And so, that kind of had its own challenges, religion, which I think is common. Obviously, you hear that a lot in the recovery world when you go to meetings and everything. There's always that struggle or difficulty with God or religion for a lot of the people I've met, at least. And so that's part of my story. But where I grew up was amazing, it was beautiful, and all my friends, everything, I loved it. And it's what I knew. And my parents, I kind of had a little bit of outside the bubble though, because it could be a very bubble-like place. And kind of a Mayberry where you don't think there's anything wrong with the world, And so my parents both grew up in Southern California and had a lot of family there. And so I always wanted to live there. And ironically enough, I did. That's where I ended up getting sober. So I moved there for not maybe the reasons I originally wanted to. But after some attempts in Utah, I went to a place a few times. It was this particular place I went to in California that allowed the space and time for me to change and get introduced to recovery in 12 steps in a way I had never experienced before, which was a young people's demographic. That young people's recovery thing didn't exist where I was from yet. Now it's there, and I love what the recovery world has done. it's grown and expanded in ways on college campuses that is just awesome. So kind of back up a little bit. I growing up in Utah, I started kind of getting into some mischief and trouble pretty early, I guess, in elementary school. Whether it was like cursing on the playground or taking an extra chocolate milk and putting it in my baseball glove with my buddies and just kind of stealing something, and getting caught and in trouble and consequences. But a lot of that behavior was kind of learned. Well, of course it was learned, but early on it's like a protective thing. With my dad had a lot of anger issues, and a lot of that was directed towards like me and my mom, not physically or anything, but just verbally, some stuff, just scary stuff. And but it's what he knew. Come to find out after all these years, there's been a lot of work, and we have an amazing relationship today, so I will say that. But going through that, it was scary. But I remember kind of wanting to take that attention off and make it be directed towards me. And so I would act out and do certain things that would kind of steer that anger towards me. And I kind of found I guess like a release in that somehow. Really just kind of fed that that ego or that victim role. Even though it's like a lot of it was just like trauma that wasn't maybe deserved, it's still something I perpetuated. And I've learned that over time, like that I kind of continue to spin that wheel of insanity in my life if I don't do the work, And so I'll redo and, self-sabotage like crazy. And, so sports was like my outlet, started at a very young age, in baseball in particular. I started traveling at 12 years old. At 15, I got an injury and prescribed painkillers, and that was the beginning of the end for me. I had, started drinking and smoking pot, but those painkillers really gave me that release, that sense of, oh, I arrived, no matter how shitty or crappy and I feel on the inside, no matter how dumb I think I am and what I tell myself, like when I took that, nothing mattered. And I chased that feeling and that habit, and it progressed over the next 10 years to heroin and, doing other stuff as well. But that was kind of the end all, was through Oxycontin and then heroin. I lost scholarships for baseball. I went to college, got kicked out, walked on and had another opportunity, but I was so in my addiction that it just didn't even matter. And then that's kind of began my cycle of going to treatment, getting in trouble, going to jail, misdemeanors, get out of jail by going to rehab, all that, that cycle began.
Yeah.
But, the education was what it was back then, and with my family, everything was like church related. Like if you're going to, in order to change, you got to do this. And I just wasn't doing, I pretended or whatever, but it wasn't working. But a big part of that was, what I learned in the 12 steps was taking accountability, and actually in that 4th step, looking at my part in all of these situations that had taken place, because for years I carried that like blaming, pointing the finger at like the dean of the college, getting kicked out, like that's your fault, that was on you guys, but not taking accountability for the fact that I broke every single rule in the book constantly while I was there. Maybe I didn't get caught for all that stuff, and what I got in trouble for was minute and so silly, but big picture was very deserved, And but that was part of that self-sabotage. It was like no matter what, nothing good was ever going to happen, and I believed that, and I would play that tape in my head, and it's like, so much has changed since then. So in 2007, I went into this place in California. June 26, 2007 is my sobriety date, and I went there, and yeah, that was a place like no other. There's 24 guys living in this house, all ages like 18 to 50 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking bunk beds, 4 guys in a room, all adult males, and not with great, some of them didn't have the best hygiene, and showers weren't something that was in their regular routine. And so a lot of that was life skills. And so, that's what this place did though. It was like starting from scratch. Like you're going to learn how to make your bed again, how to fold your clothes and put them away and do your dishes. And there was consequences that fit the bill for each thing that if you broke the rules. And it was a breaking down of the ego that was so needed. And it was done by your peers. Like that was like the magic of it. Like that's probably what was different for me was I had a big thing with authority, like obviously, because they all represented um, something negative to me, of this belief that I was bad, that like I didn't, I was a bad person. I deserved all this stuff. And so anything authority like was like a reminder of how crappy I was. And so I rebelled
Mm-hmm.
against it. Um, and so anyways, yeah. I was there for 13 months, by choice. Yeah, and we're talking no cell phones, which I didn't care then. This is 2007 to 2008. I didn't even have a cell phone yet. I had like one cell phone. I just had a pager. It's like I didn't want nobody getting a
Well,
hold of me.
2007. Oh, I suppose I had one by then. I was thinking when I got my first cell phone, that was early
Yeah,
2000. So yeah, okay.
yeah. People had them. I didn't care for them. Like technology, computers. You find me outside, nature, like that. That's just what I was. So I didn't really jump on that wave too much. So I was very behind. Like kind of like you could put me with my grandparents. With like how much I knew. It was real
But maybe
bad.
better, all the research that's coming out, not to interrupt you, but maybe better for your brain that you didn't, right? You were already doing, you were doing things that perhaps weren't same thing for me, that perhaps weren't as good for our brains, but at least you
Yeah.
weren't also then fighting with this whole thing about social media and
Oh my
stuff.
gosh. Like what we're talking about earlier with the like what kids are facing these days, like it's unbelievable. Um so yeah, I got sober. I was 24, about to be 25. I went there, was there for a year. My life got better, like I felt happiness, I felt joy, I felt peace, I felt things I hadn't felt in years. And that's what kind of kept me each time. Like, I mean, it wasn't easy by any means. Like there was many of times I wanted to leave that place. And sometimes I packed my bags ready to go. But there would be, that those guys in the house that would come sit with you and just talk things through and help you play the tape out. And at that point, playing the tape out was pretty simple. Meaning like what I knew what was going to happen. It wasn't going to end well. My plans weren't good. So I would stay. And I stayed long enough to, kind of complete something positive for the first time in a while. Like, yes, I graduated high school, but I cheated a lot, and teachers helped me in ways they probably shouldn't have. They kind of played a codependent role, and crippled me in a lot of ways. But everything happens the way it's supposed to. Everything is a learning process. So, but yeah, like if I didn't play sports, like I wouldn't even been in school. Like let's just be honest. Like and I skipped kind of a big component, which was going into my senior year. My youngest sibling, he drowned on July 3rd in 2000. And so I was 17 and he was 3, almost 4. And I have 2 sisters and another brother in between, us. And that was a huge kind of turning point, catapult me in the direction of like self-sabotage, because I felt that should have been me, like I was the bad kid. I was the one who was always messed up. I was the one causing problems. Like, and so I struggled with that for a while. And I wasn't there the day that happened, which was a whole other story for another time. But just the way that, God kind of had that plan laid out was perfect, and but was extremely difficult and, haunted me for years and still does, and I've had to do a lot of work around that. And so it's life happens to everybody, and that's something that I think I've learned a lot in my own path of this recovery process is you never know what someone's going through, and um it's just you never know. And so just I try to do my best to meet people with grace, and there's times I'm horrible at it, but I feel like I do a pretty good job. I mean, I made a career out of, kind of holding space for people, so they can talk about their most difficult, hardest times. And so, and I've got my story, and it's there's ones that are worse or more difficult, and there's some that aren't, and it's just whatever. It's not about that. You can't measure trauma. You can't tell someone how big or small their experience is. We all experience things differently, and and I guess at the end of the day, like, all what I wanted was that, like, happiness. And one thing I really loved about coming on your show was the emphasis of joy,
Hmm.
obviously, right? That, I mean, it's amazing. And so, like, that's what I want. Like, that's seriously something that I lacked and did not have, that I wanted. And once I started to have it, I didn't want to let it go, and so I've not been perfect at that by any means, but I've been through some tough times. Getting sober didn't mean my life just got completely better. In
I
fact,
think
I've
sometimes
gone,
people forget that part, right? That they
right.
think, oh, you get sober and then all of a sudden it's just better and life is
Everything's
rainbows and
easy.
sunshine and rainbows and butterflies and all of those things. And I think I've mentioned before, but I have my own, which I'm not going to tell today, but I have my own recovery journey. But I think I love that some of the things, Chase, that you brought up, some of the things that kind of, I was jotting some notes down, that I would love to ask you about. One, we'll get to the space, we'll get to the thing about where joy and grief can exist together. It's not one
Mm,
or the other. Those things can coexist. But I would love to hear a little bit, if you're comfortable talking about it, about your whole evolution of what God means to you. We talk about spirituality, we talk about God, and, having been through the 12 steps myself, but I think it's such an interesting, you probably have an interesting perspective given how you grew up in a probably there was a fairly defined, well,
yeah.
defined, God was fairly defined, I think, for you. And that is just an assumption that I am making, and you can change, you can correct me if I'm
Yeah.
wrong. But I'm
No,
assuming
that's,
that you went through some sort of a transformation with what God means or with what your relationship is. So I'd love just to hear you talk a little bit about that, because I liken a lot of times, that I talk about joy, but ultimately it's just the energy from God, right? So for me, that's what it is. So if there are
yeah,
people that are listening that don't have a strong faith, that doesn't mean you can't participate in joy, but that is kind
right.
of how I define it. But I would love to hear kind of if you're comfortable
Yeah,
talking about that.
absolutely. No, for sure. Yeah, I mean, yeah, growing up, it was Sunday was church, and that's what it was. And it was 3 hours, and as you got older, there was different responsibilities that you were able to take on, and different kind of ranks within the church, so to speak. And with that meant keeping the commandments and the word of God. And that was no drinking, no smoking, no nicotine, no stuff, sexual stuff with nothing, none of that stuff, right? And so, um, which a lot of it was, I would say, instilled through like a fear base, like, kind
Mm-hmm.
of, but in like a happy way. But at the same time, it was protective, because it's like there's so much good in what churches provide. Like, there is so much good. I guess what a lot of my struggle was, believing that, like, it was the only way, when there were so many people who don't believe in that faith. How can they all be wrong and we're right? Like, I just don't understand. I don't think any of us really know what God's intention truly is, other than joy and just being nice, be kind. Like, just pretty simple. But, so, growing up, it was like, okay, that's what church, you go to church on Sundays and you follow these rules. And when you turn this age, you do this and this and this. And it was like, okay, but, like, again, I was a baseball guy. Like, and I started traveling at 12 years old, and they play baseball on Sundays when you play in the major leagues in college and stuff. And I was okay with that. And, I didn't know so much if they were okay with that. And so it was, just kind of what I grew up learning, kind of contradicted a lot of like what I thought I wanted to do. So I was just confused, like
Mhm.
I think really early on, confused in a lot of ways. Like I couldn't truly be myself, I felt like I had to hide who I was. I felt like I couldn't truly be me. And a lot of times as a kid, I remember like wanting to be somebody else. Like maybe my life would be better if I was like that person, and so that in one of my favorite quotes I think I've ever heard is like comparison is the thief of joy. When we compare ourselves to something or someone else or another life or whatever, we absolutely will not feel happiness. We will be miserable because you
Yeah.
can't feel happiness when you're there, and
Yes.
so um there I will say I've kind of like gone full circle to where like I've found myself going to church again, and I've grown up and matured to understand it's a safe place, it's a place like going to a meeting, going to a 12-step meeting. It's just another space where a community is there, people that are, pushing and aiming in a direction that I want to go, like I want happiness. I want that for my family. I want peace. I don't want the chaos that comes with what I used to do when I was doing the stuff I was doing when I was younger. There was no happiness. Everything was fake, like it was a world of takers, and there was no true friendships. I didn't have any real friends. I didn't have real relationships. And so like I had to relearn all that and what does that look like? What does a friendship really look like? And that's for me became somebody that held me accountable, someone that let me know if I was messing up, or if I wasn't doing things that I should. Those are the type of people I want in my corner, and in my partner in life. Like, that's what I want with her is
Right.
to be, held to that same standard. And I have that. And I didn't for a long time, I was married, like I said, I've got three kids, and unfortunately that ended, and you know, but fortunately that ended at the same time, and so that's for a whole other probably podcast topic around joy, but I became like a doormat in my own life, and became very okay with that, and lived that way for the better part of like 12, 13 years
Hmm.
before I was finally like, I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this anymore. You know, I got sober, like I said, June 26, 2007. About 4.5 years later, I was going with a group of men that worked in the same industry as me to the first of about 10 years of doing this to come after that until COVID hit. Um, it was a 3 day like intensive inner child work. I didn't know that's what we were going to necessarily when I went. We thought it
But
was
you
like a
quickly
month.
found out. You quickly
Oh
found
yeah,
out, right?
yeah. But I needed that's like I needed that because like I was going to meetings and like I was at a plateau of a kind I hadn't experienced yet. Like they kind of came like at 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. Like I've had different challenges in life where, and it's always centered around like what you just asked me the question about, religion and God and what is that to me. It's always when I am lacking like spirituality and connection, like whenever I pull away from like prayer, meditation, that self-care stuff, and detach from source. If I when and it's kind of like I think I got this, and it's subconscious. Like I'm not consciously doing that either. Like a lot of like I'm sure at times there's like I'm defying, but a lot of it's like in the quiet, just I'm gonna unplug from spirituality for a little bit and go be a free bird. Like why? That's just like getting your wings clipped mid-flight. Like what am I doing? But
No,
I didn't.
seriously, and I feel the same way, and it's so interesting. And then when because it's not it's just like one day you just don't meditate because you sleep in, or you do, or you just like it's a slow thing, and then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you think, and it's not like it's not as if even you're so far off the path, right?
Yeah.
You're just disconnected, and you're wondering why things aren't easy anymore. And you're like, oh, it's because I'm trying to figure it out myself when I could be connected. And the easier way is just to get reconnected and let that source be the
Yeah.
guide. And then all of a sudden things start, well, I found at least things just start to fall back into place. And then I think, duh, why, like
Why
what?
did I do that?
Why did I
For
do
the
that?
892,000th time, like
Right. Like, and it's been proven to me so many times that if you stay
yeah.
connected, that, your life is so much easier. That is, yeah. I'm
I
glad
think
I'm
I have
not
amnesia.
alone in that. Yeah.
Yeah, I must
Yeah.
have like some sort of like form of amnesia, like
Something.
I just
Well,
forget.
the other question I had, or one of the other questions that I had too, and this kind of goes into the joy piece as well, is you mentioned while you were going through in 2006, I suppose, then to rediscovering joy because that hadn't been part of. So, talk to me a little bit about how, because I believe this, that joy isn't an either or, that we can see tiny delights throughout the day, and sometimes we just need those. Talk to me just about how, if you can remember, how that shift started to happen, or what that looked like for you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. So, 2006, like I was completely detached from anything spiritual, God. Like I was in the darkest part of my life, using, a scary drug, heroin, and it got to like where when I asked for help, I was, wasn't getting arrested. It wasn't going to jail. It wasn't being in rehab or anything. It was literally, I just met up with my, dealer, got my stuff, and I sat there and I'm like, I'm just gonna do, I'm just gonna keep doing it until I don't wake up. And like that scared me to death. Like I was like, oh, I mean, I had the adult tantrum of I don't want to live, like, like in moments of my life, but never did I like I meant that. Like I was like that could have just as easily gone that way, and like I could no longer be here, right? And so, and that's what scared me. And I called my mom like immediately, like just called her and was like, I need help. Like I'll go because they did like a little intervention on me, which this wasn't the first time. Like I'd gone to treatment 4 times already, 5 times already, before this, but they had I was in the worst place obviously that anybody had ever seen me, and it's because I didn't care anymore. Like I was done. Like I didn't care what happened and taking stupid risks, doing dumb stuff, and so they did an intervention and I didn't go. I caused a scene and left and but it was like I think it was probably like I'd have to ask him, but I feel like it was like 2 months later is what it felt like. It might have been like a month later, I don't know, but is when I had that moment sitting in the car. I called my mom, and I didn't even go immediately either. I still made her wait like another few days, like made it seem like I had things to do, like I got I got to get everything in order. I had nothing to do, literally. All my belongings when they picked me up were in a trash bag. Okay, like I didn't have anything to do. So, yeah, I was just scared, So change is scary. So that was, I think, the shift, and was like that moment when I wanted to end it. Essentially, I had no joy. I had no happiness. I did not feel love. I didn't feel anything. I was alone and just scared and miserable and shameful and just regret and just all the things, it's like all I did was sit there all day long. And when I was like lucid enough, from the drugs, like all I was thinking about was how shitty I was, and like that was my life. And so when I moved into this place, it was different and it was hard, but I started to see other people having joy. And I was like, how? Like, why? I'm very curious, because these are guys that were just like me and were doing the same stuff I was doing, but they were like 3 months ahead of me or 6 months ahead of me, 9 months ahead of me. guys that were like a year graduating, in-house graduate, so like it was a real family community, really cool, amazing program. But it was, again, like all my peers. And so I started to see the joy in them, and I wanted that. And so I started asking the questions like, how do I get there? And a lot of my, I had so much shame around God and like spirituality and church and religion and church, and what does that all look like, and like just holding on to this, like, I don't want to be, connected to the Mormon church. Like, I don't want that. I didn't get to choose that. Like, it would have been okay if I chose it, but like I was told what to do, and all this other negative stuff associated with, my childhood or whatever that, you know, that happened and went on is also why, like, I just so, detached from that, because it's like, how could that happen in my, how could that happen to me and this be the right, religion? So I don't know. It's just so many topics we could talk about in that right there. But yeah, like I wanted to feel good again. I wanted to feel joy. I wanted to feel happiness. And I knew that that was a big part of that, was having that connection to God. And so like in I, and higher power can be source, God, higher, whatever it wants to be for somebody, it can be the ocean, it can be like people, I've heard all sorts of stuff in the rooms, and that's cool. I just know for me, like um it's definitely changed. Like I had like a view of God as a kid as like, kind of scared of God. Like if he's up there really keeping track of me, like keeping score, like, and I made a lot of mistakes, like I'm screwed, like according to like what I've learned, I'm in trouble. So, I don't think he likes me very much. But as I've gotten older, I realized it's not, I didn't understand what my parents were saying. I was young. I was had my I needed to grow up and mature and have my own life experiences, and I have. And again, it's real easy to see when I'm detached from the spirituality and from God, because my life will end up in like a circus, it'll just be
Yeah.
crazy town.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. No, and I love that. And it's interesting when you were talking, you said two things. So I have 5 pillars of joy that I talk about, and you mentioned 2 of them. So one of them is nurture connection. So connection, there's really good research on that. We need to be connected in order to experience
yeah.
joy. So that connection, that you were in a house with other people, maybe not of your choice necessarily, but that you did
Yeah.
see something that they had that you wanted. And so creating that connection helps us experience joy. And then the whole thing about source, I call it being open to something greater. So whatever it is that you call that. So those two of the 5 pillars that I have, I mean, you just talked about. And so interesting that then those 2 things helped you in that whole kind of joy journey. I would love to transition just a tiny bit and talk about, so you went through you went through these experiences, let's call them that. And I think the truest form of a coach is you go through these experiences and then you turn around and you help others. So
Yeah.
would love to know kind of that transition from when I mean, we're never fully actualized, I don't think, until we die, right? So that we're continuing to learn and grow and learn about ourselves. But there certainly was a point that you came to. So I'd love to talk about that point, about what flipped in your brain, or when did you decide, okay, I am now ready to help starting others? And I would love to know kind of the journey that you took then to get to the Austin integration coaching, and how, like, what that looked like.
Yeah. So once I got, like I said, I was in that house I moved in June 25th is the day I moved in. And I was loaded. So that's why my sobriety date was the next day. And there's a fun story there too, because I lied and said I had, my sobriety date was different. And that ended up coming out a month in, and it was a whole learning experience for me. But I was there and graduated in August, so 13 months later. And during that time, I'd been, like I said, I'd been to rehab 4 or 5 times before this. And when I was at this other place, I actually had worked for them too. And so
Mm-hmm.
like I had had that experience of being without, spirit, without the spirit, being in the darkness, and then wanting the light again in my life, and wanting that happiness. And so I had that going back and forth. And so when I got to about 9 months in the recovery house, is around the time one of the guys who worked there started to kind of groom me around, like, if he thought kind of checking my pulse if I thought I would want to work in this field,
Mm-hmm.
and I did, like I admired the owner and the people, all the managers and people who worked for him. I mean, there was at the time 2 houses, one for guys like 16 to 20, and then the house that we were in for like 20 to 40 is what it became. And then we opened up a third house around the time I graduated. And so that's why they started kind of grooming me, because I was an in-house graduate for another 2 months, and then I moved directly into the young house and became the in-house manager there. We opened up a third house and kind of had 3 houses that were very age specific, and with 86 beds overall. I mean, it's a well-oiled machine. It's amazing. It's even grown beyond that too. I worked there for about 5 years, and it was like my college education. It was
That's amazing.
everything I needed. Yeah, I learned admissions there, how to do coaching there, I ran groups, all sorts of stuff. And so, I mean, I learned a lot. And so yeah, it was like, but what happened was, in the house, being like a house member and getting to that like kind of 3 to 6 month phase of like really turning a corner of like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
here and committed, like I'm doing this. And going to meetings every day, working with a sponsor, working the steps, being held accountable, still making mistakes, going through stuff, but really becoming, a lot of that too was like my brain was like finally developing, like the frontal lobe was still
Yeah.
not developed. And so my impulse, control was not existent at all. And it showed, in many ways. But like, it was funny because like, as I got sober, like I started to realize like choice became a thing again. Like I don't have to do that. I
Right.
don't have to
Right.
make stupid decisions. I can make good ones.
I can choose good
Um,
ones. I talk about
yeah,
choosing joy all the time. So you can choose good things, right?
you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
choose
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah. But my sponsor, he was amazing. It was I tried 2 other sponsors first. Awesome guys. Just, I picked them because of reasons I wanted to pick them. And that became clear pretty quick, like, and that's because of the house I was in. They were on you. Like the accountability there was crazy. Like nothing else. Like it was nuts. And so like you wouldn't get away with much. And thank goodness, it's like people didn't want you there if you didn't want to be serious. Like nobody really, like, people did not get high in that place. Like if you wanted to get high, you left.
Yeah,
Like you
yeah, yeah.
packed your shit and you left straight up. I mean, sometimes it happened. Like people would go to work and like come home high, but like as far as in the house, like as much cleaning and, accountability and groups and everything, like, no, that wasn't happening. And you had a bunch of professional drug addicts living in there. We would pick up on it like that. If someone
Right,
was
right,
loaded,
right.
we knew.
Yeah, you would know.
And
Yeah,
it happened. The relapse happens before the relapse. The joy goes away. It
agreed,
doesn't mean you're
agreed.
happy
Yeah,
all the time. That's what you're saying. Like the joy in the little places. You're right. Like I wasn't stoked about being in this house all the time. You know, I was 24, turned 25. Like of course, for when we get sober, like you take drugs and alcohol away immediately. For me, I turned to like girls. I
sure.
did that a lot,
Yeah,
and so going to the rehab I went to the first 4 times was co-ed, and it wasn't the best place to go for me. And this place was all men. We weren't allowed to date. We weren't allowed to do that stuff, and so it really made me look at me.
yeah,
Like I couldn't escape with that stuff, you know. And my first sponsor was like, "You're crazy for being." He was like a cool guy, you know, like tattoo artist in LA, and he was like, you know, "You sure you want to live in this place, man? Like they're pretty strict," you know. And I'm like, maybe you shouldn't be my sponsor.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
I don't think you listen to anything I've said
All
here,
right.
you know,
Yeah.
like that's probably exactly where I need to be. And luckily I knew that, and I shared that with some of the guys in the house, and then they told on me, you know. They like went to the house manager, was like, "Hey, Chase has the sponsor who's saying this to him." And
Yeah.
like they're so like it was like accountability was crazy. Um and so my sponsor Thomas, that's I got super sidetracked there. I actually remember what I was going to tell you. It's amazing. So Thomas, he used to tell me a lot, you know, and he was English too, so he had an English accent. It was awesome. And he would tell me, you know, Chase, if you're sitting in your shit for more than a few minutes, you're enjoying it. And it was like his little reminder that like I spent so much of my life enjoying being miserable because that's what I thought I deserved. That like he would tell me too, like when I showed up, like I didn't have low confidence, I had none, like a zero. He was like, "You were negative, you know, you owed the bank,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
some money on your confidence," you know. So it was like it wasn't existent at all. And a lot of that was my identity was wrapped up in like sports and being like this baseball person. And like once that was gone, like I didn't have any self-worth. And so I had to really learn to love myself and find ways to like myself. And you know that was hard to do. You know it was way easier for me to be a hype man for everybody else, but when it's like comes to me, like you know, I'm like, I'm good. Don't worry about me. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but a lot of that too is I didn't want to do the hard stuff, you know, as well, you know. And so that 13 months being in that house really was like facing my mirror, looking in the mirror and facing myself every day in ways that like otherwise I wouldn't have. And, you know, it showed I saw a lot of my shadows and in areas of my life that would put me at a lot of risk again. And, you know, I can proudly say I've not touched, oh my gosh, I haven't gotten anywhere near what yeah, it's like I can't even believe I was that person, you know. It's
Yeah.
nuts to think that like I would sit there and shoot drugs into my arm. Like, what? That's insane. Like I hated getting
But what
shots. I was
probably then
terrified.
makes you such a great counselor now or therapist, and I don't know what title you use exactly, but for young men who are
Yeah,
in that same situation because you were there, you did the work, and you understand then all the things, right? So I'm
yeah,
assuming that you have helped, I don't know, thousands now of people throughout groups or throughout the work that you're doing then too, to be okay with being there and knowing that they're going on that journey.
yeah. No, I mean it's true. And like I can speak to it, you know, like and because I know for me, like I had a few counselors early on that were bless their hearts, they're great people, but they were in the church. You know, my parents made me go to like church recovery places, you know, and like these folks they'd never done any of this stuff. So they didn't know what I was talking about, you know. Doesn't mean you can't work if you've never done it, but if there was just a level of it for me that was like, you just don't get it. And so I've seen that big time. To what you were saying, to your point, absolutely. Like I went through all that I went through in order to sit across from these guys. So when they tell me and I can relate, they feel okay, you know, and it's like they're like, oh, okay, he gets it, you know, he
And
does understand.
that's amazing, Chase, because I think part of who we are as humans is we just want to feel seen, like really feel seen.
Yeah,
And because you have been there, you have that. And again, you're right. You don't necessarily have had to gone through all of the things in order to understand. But I don't know, maybe for a lot of the
maybe.
people that sit across the table from you
Yeah,
now that you have done that, and especially I would guess in that because I was never a young man, in that, that young guy kind of thing, it's nice to be, it's probably easier for them to be a little more vulnerable and to
yeah,
get to the real thing because and they can also see in you then the joy and this is what you can be if you do the work.
yeah, like life's not over. Like, because, you know, I thought it was going to be over when I was young, thinking like, I'm never going to smoke weed again. I'm never going to drink again. I'm never going to,
What is
like,
there to
I'm
do
never going to
then? What am
have
I going to
fun.
do?
What am I going to do? Like, you tell me I have to, basically be Mormon again, you know? Like, I didn't want, no, just kidding. Isn't it funny though? Like, oh, maybe my parents weren't so wrong, you know?
So far
I've
off.
got, yeah,
So
that's
so
funny.
talk to me then a little bit about what you do now. So the work
Hmm.
that you do, how do people come to you?
Find
Is
me.
it that
Yeah.
they um, are in that same space that you were and they're reaching out for help? Is it like how does that relationship with you even start?
Yeah. So it can be, it's pretty cool. Like I guess I've kind of positioned myself to be of use at any state of the game. So it could be on the front end of intervention, like we're talking they're still out there in the streets doing their thing, and we're gonna family plan and come together and create a game plan to get them into a program. To I get a lot of calls from, families where they're finishing up like 30 days in treatment or 60 days or 90 days, and they're transitioning to whatever's next. I come in at that point and can help with that transition process. Um, and sometimes it's when they're going back home. So it can be at any part in the process. How they find me is, I've got a website which, we can talk about.
I'll
It's,
link in the show notes.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Um, but yeah, like sometimes therapists, treatment centers refer families to me, but yeah, it's a lot of word of mouth and previous families. Yeah,
And so talk a little bit more about that. So you work with both the
yeah. So
person
what
who
I
is going
do,
through recovery and then also families as well, so that you because
yeah,
that was something that was fascinating, because you're right, it doesn't just happen to the person, right? If you're living, and most of us are living in some sort of a family structure, regardless of how um, functional or not. Most of us
yeah,
come from a family of something, right? So you then help that whole ecosystem.
yeah, yeah. Um, so yeah, my client isn't just, Johnny. It's mom, dad, husband, wife, whatever the case may be. Um, but whoever's going to be a part of the person, like there's always going to be the identified person, they're calling about Johnny, right? And so, okay, Johnny's got this going on. Cool. Now that we have that, we have the rest of everybody who's going to be a part of Johnny's recovery is also now part of the process. And honestly, sometimes they need a lot more than even Johnny does, you know. But it makes sense. Like they're not at fault. It's like they're living two lives themselves, worrying all the time, sleepless nights, not knowing, like, because like I know from my own parents, like, and what they shared with me, and my brother had his struggles too, and like I've had other family, members and relatives, and so I mean it goes, everyone's been through it or is experiencing it in some way, so we all know, like we're all touched by it somehow. But um for that reason, me working just with their son isn't going to be enough. If they go back home to the same situation they were in before, nothing, they're it's going to be a trigger for them too. And so they already feel like they're the bad one, that they're this like black sheep. We all kind of have that in common, like we're the black sheep of the family, when like that's not really the case. A lot of times they're the lights of the family. They're the ones helping shed the light on the problem, which is generational. It's not just going on right here. We're talking about grandparents and grandparents and before us. It's like stuff that was passed down, and so that's why the whole family system needs to be addressed. And so yeah, I do weekly calls with everybody, and we're going to talk about stuff, and I'm going to make suggestions. And there's a lot of really cool programs out there that are, intensives. You can do them online. You can go in, you can go do a 3-day intensive in person. I go do them myself. I did it for a long time, and it's a game changer. That's what you kind of alluded to. Like we never fully have it figured out. you know, and if we did, it'd be boring, you know, like,
It would be rewrite. Sometimes Chase, I wish I could just check the box and be like, okay, done, got that lesson, and done and done.
yes,
But you're right.
yeah,
That's not how life works. But I find it refreshing and really interesting that this work isn't done more often in recovery, because you're right, it does. I mean, I know that there are other groups that are out there, Al-Anon and such, but I love the perspective of, one, because it is about connection, then two, that we all come
yeah,
from somewhere, and it is about that. Yes, there is work to be done on all levels, because that issues don't happen in isolation, right? It doesn't happen in isolation, and this is not a blame thing. It's not to say that, oh,
mm,
and here's where, and I would assume that that is not the conversations that you're having either, but that it's not, oh, I'm this way because of this other person, but that there are some things that, yes, everybody has, um, responsibility is the right word, but everybody has a role to play in what happened.
yeah. Responsibility is a great word. Accountability, you know, you're right. Like everybody plays a part, you know, and how we react and act in situations. And so whether we like it or not, like it all causes ripples, you know, it does. And so, yeah. And
Right.
for
It's like the
that, it's like,
butterfly effect in families,
yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
everybody's action is gonna, something else is gonna come out of that. So I am so um encouraged that there are people like you that are out there that are addressing not just the person that has the problem, but what that looks like in a whole ecosystem. So that's awesome. And that
Yeah.
must be for you then too, like how rewarding for you to be able to, challenging, I'm sure too, but rewarding for you to be able to see the growth in, and not just in one person, but in family structures.
It is. And it's, you know, I'm constantly trying to think of how I can do a better job, you know, like how can I offer more or like get to the core of it faster. And we got some exciting things that we're gonna be rolling out and trying here soon, to do that. But it's like an ongoing learning process. Like for me, going and doing like self-care work and working on myself has opened up more doors of like things I can do for people I get to work with, you know, like carpet work and, you know, IFS interfamily system work is some of the most profound work you can do, you know, and so there's really cool ways to like heal, you know. It doesn't have to feel like a four-walled room with a notebook and pen and paper and, you know, doctors and like that
Well,
sucks.
and everybody is different, right? And so
Yeah,
everybody's going to respond in a different way to different healing processes. So I love that fact too, that you as a practitioner continue to, one, you've said this many times throughout the conversation today too, that you're doing your own self work, and again that you continue to do your own self work, so continue to grow in yourself and in your own process. But then I love it that then you're able to continue to share all of that, those new learnings, with other people too, because we're always learning new things, right, about the brain and about how, I love
yeah,
this new, it's not new, but this research about how joy impacts the brain, and so how all of these things are impacting, and the more they're studying, the more everything is interconnected, right? It's not
it's
just your
crazy.
brain or your stomach or your, working out or doing whatever, that everything is connected. And
Connected.
so, and
It's
treating it as
nuts.
such is,
Yeah.
um, I think there's some exciting things that are going to come out. So yeah, that's awesome.
So like just like what you just said, right? Like it's all connected. And if we came from our parents, you know, we're connected. It's all connected. That's why it's like I do the whole family. It's like, you know, like and a lot of that again, personal experience. My sisters had their own struggles, like, and theirs wasn't in the form of substances the way it was for me and my brother. It was happened to be the burden of being the good one, and like literally not getting the nurturing and love maybe that they deserve to get because we had all the energy from our parents being focused on myself and then my brother, that like my sisters in a way felt like they didn't, you know, they didn't get the nurturing and love that they needed, you know. And so it's like I caused that, you know. That's for me to wear, you know, to a degree, right? And so it's just all intertwined. And like I'm close with my siblings to this day, and like I wish I was closer. Like living in different states is hard, And we all got kids, but like, everyone's affected, and knowing that that's the case in my own family, I know that's for the case of every family that calls me, it's going to be their case too. Like, how many kids do you have? Who's all invited? Who's involved in your family? Because they're all affected. Like,
Yeah.
let's just cut it what it is. I've talked to grandparents before.
I'm
Where
sure.
like
Well,
I'll have
it's a
yeah,
generate. You said that before too, Chase. That it is a generational thing, and I think that not only from our emotional perspective, but I've done some research too, just about how generational things impact our bodies, and right. I
yep.
think that is all, and generational trauma, is a thing.
Hmm.
As we kind of wind down here, one of the things I have on my notes is that I would love to talk to you at some point too. And one of my next books is going to be about grief and joy and how those two things can coexist. And I'm sure could
I
have
love
a
that.
couple of podcasts, talking even about like,
Seriously.
your sibling that died. So like what
Yeah.
grief does to a family and how joy can, can kind of help that as well. But would love to today. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you're like, I really want people to know this? I will make sure that I, put all of your contact information in the show notes so that people can get a hold of you.
Awesome.
But anything else that kind of at the end here that you're like, I want people to really understand?
Yeah, no, I think so I do, yeah, I mean the coaching and then intervention, transport, companionship, I mean anything like that. I'm if you just have a question, if you just need a direction, like whatever. Like, I mean, yeah, you'll put my information up. So no, I think we covered it. This is
Yeah,
awesome.
well, this was a beautiful first conversation. I'm just going to put that out into the universe, the first conversation, Chase, because I think
Of
that there
many.
are,
I think we could talk about a lot of stuff. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I look forward to the second and third conversations as well. But thank you, thank you, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
And again, for everyone listening to the podcast, this is Rachel from Joy Unfiltered, and have a amazing rest of your day or week whenever you're listening to this. And remember, from my heart to yours, I am celebrating you today and every day. So have fun, live well, enjoy.